Hi, I'm Karl Konrad and welcome to this week's edition of Australian Immigration News. In tonight's program, our Home Affairs Minister finally faces the National Press Club, state allocation numbers have been cut, how the NIV has been a visa flop, the new occupation shortage list reveals some disturbing trends, and what type of debts can ruin your chances to obtain permanent residency. First, a big thank you to all of our new subscribers and of course the constant support of our regular viewers. This program is proudly brought to you by Australian Immigration Law Services, the company I founded right here in the heart of Sydney now over 26 years ago. At last, our Home Affairs Minister Tony Bourke has decided to demonstrate some leadership and clarify many of the truths surrounding the permanent migration planning levels, as well as the confusion over the net overseas migration numbers during his address at the National Press Club this week. Credit where it's due, he gave a solid performance and showed a good understanding of these two critical issues, even if it's been somewhat overdue. Firstly, his comments on the NOM, the net overseas migration.
The debate, though, about numbers also needs to be had honestly. First thing, after the pandemic, net overseas migration was always going to go up. Always going to go up. It was going to go up for two reasons. First of all, a whole lot of people who'd been waiting to come here were all going to come at once. Student visas, for example. First year, second year, third year students who'd left were all going to come in the same year. There was always going to be an increase in net overseas migration. But also everybody who was coming overwhelmingly, some still had life left on their old visa, but a whole lot of people who were coming post-pandemic got a new visa. So the expiry dates were pushed out. So we had a situation where normally you get a natural overlap of expiry dates of a similar amount coming up each year, and we had a series of years where that didn't happen, which obviously has a huge impact on a net figure.
Finally, we have a straightforward explanation that should help put an end to this ridiculous big Australia conspiracy theories. The reality is that the pandemic created unprecedented ripple effects on visa allocations. Never before has this country experienced such a disruption. And to make matters worse, we've seen a record number of Australians returning home from overseas, something, as the Minister pointed out, is beyond the government's ability to control.
First of all, there is a limitation that will always be there on the predictability of net overseas migration. And that is because it is a combination of levers which are within the control of government and levers that are not controlled by government. The classic one that is not controlled by government is the behaviour of Australian citizens leaving and returning. At the moment, one of the drivers of net overseas migration is the weakness of some of the economy in some of the countries that Australians often go to work. I remember when I was Minister for Population back in, 2010, at that time there'd been a huge spike, and a lot of it was driven by following the global financial crisis. A whole lot of Australians returned home. So I think we need to be honest when you started, Natasha, with the question about predictions being wrong. There are parts of this which are not within the gift of government to be able to predict. There are parts of it which are completely within our control.
Regarding factors within the government's control, the key issue is which temporary visa holders would we consider cutting? A question that many opposition parties overlook. Instead, they just parrot the same old mass migration message without addressing specifics.
The challenge in terms of total numbers, there is a real intersection at the moment that the community is deeply feeling by housing shortage. And we need to make sure that we are continuing just to curtail net overseas migration and to bring it down while we are improving housing supply. If we go too hard, we will in fact reduce our capacity to improve housing supply, or we will mean that farmers won't be able to get working holiday workers and farm workers, or we would have a situation where our aged care system went into collapse. So there is an issue For me, the big moving part is as housing comes online, that's effectively a huge part of this.
We've all heard the opposition talk about reducing migration numbers and in particular lowering the permanent planning levels to win populist vote. However, when asked to specify which visa subclasses they would like to cut, they remained silent. The minister did well to call out those demanding cuts.
There needs to be a discussion not simply about what's the total, but what's the visa class? What's the visa class where you're going to do it? If I start now, a whole lot of focus on the permanent migration numbers actually doesn't get you very far. A huge portion of the permanent migration numbers go to people who are already here, who move from temporary visas to permanent visas, have no impact on net overseas migration. A lot of the ones who come from overseas are partner visas, who have very little impact on housing because they're partners. They're not just in the same house, they're in the same room. You need to work out, if you want to argue we need to go harder than what the government's doing, to answer the question where. In terms of saying that we need to restore manufacturing, it's a simple case. The story of Australian manufacturing and the story of labour, of workers on visas, has been the same story for the history of Australian manufacturing. In terms of other occupations, last year 21,000 visas for healthcare workers, 4,300 visas for teachers, 15,524 for construction. We've tripled the number of visas that we're giving for construction. If these are the areas where people want to cut, then they need to explain which hospitals they're going to say don't have to fill every shift, which education providers won't be teaching the full range of subjects anymore, which construction projects they are willing to wait longer for, including housing projects, if we're not going to have the labour we need to get them built. If they want to turn up for that argument, I am there. But to have the argument about total numbers without saying where you want to cut is spin without any substance at all.
The challenge now is for the opposition to engage in honest conversations. Let's have these discussions openly so the public can understand that we do need all of these people. If cuts are indeed to be made, everyone should agree on where they could possibly occur. The New South Wales government has announced some interim allocation numbers for the state-sponsored visas, the 190 and 491. With only 380 places allocated at this stage, however, they said they will start giving invitations next week. However, it appears that the total allocations have now been shared with the state and territory leaders, but they are not happy because there are cuts. We also learned this during the minister's remarks at the press club.
The state premiers this week, including Roger Cook from WA, but also Peter Malinauskas in South Australia and Jacinta Allen in Victoria, have talked about the cuts to the state-nominated visa places, and particularly in WA and South Australia. The state governments there are concerned about AUKUS and about getting tradies to build houses for the people who come here because of AUKUS. This is, I think, the second or third year that Roger Cook has raised these concerns about the setting of places in this part of the visa system. Is it perhaps time to re-look at those state-nominated places and how that system works?
Yeah, I'm having discussions with my department on exactly this at the moment.
So there you have it. The allocations have been cut and, of course, the state premiers are not pleased about it. But what are the exact numbers? It seems that the rest of us aren't worthy enough yet to receive that information just yet. Now, regarding how the system could be improved so states and territories can better expand their economic growth by importing skilled labour, the minister had this to say.
So the issue of should we be having a conversation about whether or not there's a different way of doing this, I think that is the right conversation to have, but we're early in that part of it.
We are early in that part of it. Forgive me, Minister, but it seems you must have been absent when your Home Affairs predecessor conducted extensive discussions on remapping the migration system. They even published a detailed report on this very subject during Labor's first term. Now you're telling us that you're just beginning these conversations with the premiers on how to reform the state-sponsored visa system. While we've been waiting for the new points test and complete system redesign, it appears that very little progress has actually been made. On Thursday, the department held an information session for the members of the Migration Institute of Australia regarding the 858 National Innovation Visa. The department revealed that since the program's inception, approximately 9,000 people have lodged an expression of interest, but only 304 invitations have been issued so far, and just 85 visa grants. Considering this grant figure also includes family members, it's safe to say that only around 40 highly skilled individuals have actually secured permanent residency through this subclass. Given that many of these applicants were high-caliber prominent sports people, it's clear that the program has been a complete failure in attracting the big tech and research talent it was designed to bring in. This should be a wake-up call for the government that the world's smartest people generally don't want to come to Australia, especially given the significant smaller earnings potential here. Yes, Australia offers an excellent environment to live in, but these highly driven professionals are not likely to spend much time sitting in the bush enjoying it. They're too busy working. If you're wondering why there have been few ICT occupations in the latest 189 invitation rounds, the answer can be found in the recent Jobs and Skills Australia occupation shortage list. If you search for ICT on the search finder, you'll see that most ICT occupations are not listed as shortages, indicating here in green with the label NS, no shortage. For those who haven't used the JSA website to check where their occupation stands regarding national demand, I highly recommend doing so. It's a worthwhile exercise. There's no doubt that the federal government relies on the JSA data when selecting which occupations to include in invitation rounds, alongside state and territory governments. If you look at the trade occupations such as carpenters here, you'll notice a completely different trend. Shortages are widespread across the nation. In tonight's Policy Deep Dive, we take a look at what type of debts can prevent you from obtaining your permanent residency. Firstly, let's clarify about private debts, so you don't need to worry. Car loans, credit card debts, and other debts owed to private institutions have absolutely no impact on your ability to obtain permanent residency in Australia. However, debts to certain government authorities can certainly make an impact upon you getting permanent residency, so let's discuss that for a few minutes. In relation to paying your debt, it all revolves around this regulation, Public Interest Criteria 4004. The regulation states, the applicant does not have outstanding debts to the Commonwealth unless the Minister is satisfied that appropriate arrangements have been made for their payment. There are also procedural instructions for the Department of Home Affairs case officers to follow regarding visa applicants with outstanding debts to the Commonwealth. The procedural guidelines state the term debt to the Commonwealth refers to any debts or amounts owing to the Commonwealth, not only those to the Department of Home Affairs, the department, which includes the Australian Border Force. However, the application form says something quite different from the regulations. It says, has any applicant had any outstanding debts to the Australian government or any public authority in Australia? While PIC 4004 specifically mentions only the Commonwealth Government, the question on the form also asks about debts to any public authority. This creates some confusion, as the term public authority is not explicitly defined in the Migration Act. So, what constitutes a public authority? In Australia, a public authority generally refers to an organisation or a body that performs public functions or exercises powers on behalf of the government. These entities typically provide public services, implement government policies, or regulate sectors. Some examples would include government departments and agencies, e.g. the Health Department or Education, local councils or municipalities, statutory authorities or corporations established by legislation, e.g. the ATO, public hospitals and health services, and police and emergency services. And this is where things become a little confusing, for the visa processing guidelines specifically state, if a visa processing officer becomes aware of a debt to the Commonwealth owed to another agencies, e.g. the client voluntarily discloses this information, then the client should be asked to provide evidence supporting that they have entered into a suitable payment arrangement. So the policy mentions about voluntary disclosure, but in reality they are asking a direct question on the form that compels a response. Ultimately, the purpose of asking about debts owed to any public authority appears to be to gather information that case officers might not otherwise obtain. How should you approach this question then? Remember, they are referring to debts, not bills that you've already paid. It does not relate to private debt such as banks or lenders. If you have any outstanding debts to public authorities, you must list them. The department will then determine whether these debts fall under a Commonwealth debt or not. If it is deemed to be a debt to the Commonwealth, you may be required to pay them before your visa can be granted. It is possible to clear PIC 4004 if you have made arrangements to pay these debts via a formal agreement with the relevant authority. Although there is some legal advice on the internet suggesting that the debts owed to state governments must be paid, the legislation and policy procedures specify otherwise. For the policy clearly states that debts owed to the states are not considered debts to the Commonwealth. Common examples include traffic infringements and hospital debts. And in relation to traffic infringements, if unpaid, these can lead to further legal action such as a registration of an offence, court proceedings, and potentially more serious consequences. Failing to resolve such debts may also complicate your character assessment, which you would definitely want to avoid. If you believe your case officer is requesting payment to an authority that you consider unrelated to the Commonwealth, you have the right to question the validity of that request. It's important to understand that you can only be refused a visa on the grounds to a debt to the Commonwealth under PIC 4004. Remember, if you need help, we are always here. You can book a consultation online, or if you're in a hurry, just pick up the phone. As always, take care out there, and I'll see you next time. So bye for now.